Good afternoon and welcome to another day in my life, specifically my life back in the 80s. Gosh, can you believe it was that long ago? We're going to do a couple more episodes on my life and adventures at DIC Entertainment, and then I'm going to jump back into doing some installments about writing for screenplays and for novels and for motion pictures and television, because I kind of like to balance things out, and it seems everybody is enjoying that. I'm going to say at the beginning, so Kim doesn't have to remind me, if you do enjoy it, make sure that you hit that little subscribe button at the bottom and like us, okay? Very important to us that you like us. I don't know why, but Kim knows what she's doing. Anyway, so when we last spoke, I was at the forum, and Hulk Hogan is moving hulkingly towards me, and he kind of stops, and Kevin O'Donnell thankfully comes to my rescue because my knees are like, clattering together, and he says, Hulk, this is Jack Olesker. He's one of our writers at DIC. And Hulk says, oh, okay. He says, have you written on Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling? I said, no, I haven't been involved in that show. So, and he's like, okay, this is like a mountain I'm looking up at. And he says, what shows have you written for? And it's like one of those moments where you want to grab the words and put them back in your mouth, okay? This is 6'7", 390-pound, all-muscle Hulk Hogan. And I'm telling him, I wrote for the Care Bears and Popples. I mean, God almighty. This is, like I said, Hulk Hogan. So he looks at me and he says, and he thunders out, he says, the Care Bears. And I didn't know if I should fall to my knees and, pray not to be struck by lightning or what. But I said, yeah, I wrote for the Care Bears. So he says, well, that happens to be one of my daughter's favorite shows. He says, thank you for that, brother. So I knew I was saved. I was rescued, at least for the moment. So everybody on the set gets together and, they're ready to start shooting one of these wraparounds. And like I said, I mean, what a group. Roddy Piper's there, Hulk. These guys, they were real characters in the real sense of the word. And I guess that's why they got their own show. And, aside from that, they were pretty damn good at acting. I mean, I know Hulk was in character when he was playing Thunderlips in Rocky, I think it was Rocky 2 or Rocky 3, I'm not sure which. Boy, he took some heat from Vince McMahon Sr. for taking that role. Vince McMahon Sr. did not like his wrestlers appearing in movies, but then, 1986, Hulk returned to WWF, and Hulkamania began, and all was forgiven. And if you look at, an underestimated, often not watched film called They Live, which was starring Roddy Piper. And I gotta tell you, Piper he played a detective, and for my money, he held his own with anybody, Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry. I mean, watch the film. Roddy did such an amazing job in that film. And here I'm surrounded by all the wrestlers and everything, and everybody's having a lot of fun. And they do a shot with Mean Gene talking with Roddy. It's like interviewing him with his microphone. And Gene would always wear like a tie. He was all dressed up in a suit jacket and everything else. And in the middle of the interview, Roddy says, well, this is not my first time on the set. He says, I know what's coming. And Gene says, what's coming? And he says, any second, the director is going to call cut, and I'm going to beat him to it. He pulls his scissors out of his pocket, takes Gene's tie, and he cuts it in half. And Gene just looks at, Gene was so good with Mean Gene Okerlund. He was so good with a dry sense of humor. And he looked at Roddy and he says, Roddy, you are not a nice man. And then the director actually did call cut. And of course, everybody just cracked up all over the set. And, you know, the funny thing is, the ironic thing is that Mean Gene was wrong. Roddy was a nice man. And so is the Iron Sheik. And so is Junkyard Dog, who let me jangle the chain on his neck. And, you know, all these guys were really, really nice guys. And between them, uniformly, they just loved kids, you know, that like me, they love to light up children and entertain them. So that was one of the really nice experiences in my life was having worked, or not worked with them, but at least having been able to meet the wrestlers. So I enjoyed that. So I went back to DIC that afternoon, and there was a writer named Mert Rich, who was just loved by everybody on the floor. The guy was a real character, so fast with comedic lines. I think he worked at Second City in Chicago. And his job was, he had a great job. It wasn't to write scripts. It was just to write funny lines, one-liners, and jokes for the guys on Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling. And I happened to see him coming towards me in the hallway, and Mert was always this really upbeat, funny guy. They used to pull pranks on Bobby Logan all the time. And today, he looked like so down, and I was getting ready to tell him, Mert, you know, I met all your wrestler guys, but I could see he wasn't in the mood to talk about it. I said, what's going on? And he said, I think Andy's getting ready to fire me. Which was like a real shock, because everybody just, you know, loved Mert. But, you know, life is so tenuous when you are a staff writer. I mean, you know, there were two guys, Sandy, who was the senior story editor or was the story editor for Care Bears, and the other fella that worked with me on Predicaments, and those guys, you know, they got cut. I had a hand in it, but, you know, you do what you got to do. But you're only as good as your last series. And Mert never really got his feet on the ground. He said, you know, I really kind of think I'm going to go back to Michigan. I was working in the clothing business back there, and I think that's what I'm going to do. And I felt bad about it. And about 2 weeks later, I found out that Mert and his writing partner, Brian Pollock, had a meeting at Cheers, and Cheers was like, you know, #1 show in America at the time, you know, Ted Danson, my gosh. And they thought they were going to get a script assignment or get assigned to write something. Mert comes back to the office, and he's the old Mert, bubbling, effusive. I said, what's going on? He said, the last thing that I ever could have imagined is what's going on. He says, Cheers are hiring me and Brian to be story editors for Cheers. Oh my gosh, you know, this was like, you couldn't talk to him on the phone because he was somewhere over the rainbow. You know, this was the last thing that he expected. So that's what this business is like. So then, later the same day, I'm talking with Mert. We're talking about having like a going away party for him and everything else. And Lori comes along the hallway. The writers would always congregate in the hallway. And she comes along the hallway and she looks at me and says, Jack, I got to see you in my office right now. And you know, it was like somebody had chopped me off at the knees. You know, I couldn't imagine what's going on. And Lori and I always got along great. You know, I mean, you know, I loved her. I still do love her. And she loved all of the writers, and she was an integral part of my career. And yet she was like very kind of cold when she was talking to me. I couldn't imagine what was going on. And I knew I had wrapped up on, you know, Popple. So who knows? Maybe they, you know, they don't need as many writers. So I go into her office, And all of a sudden she starts smiling. So I know she was pranking me, okay? And Lori loved to do that. You know, she would like jerk our chains just to show us who was in charge. So she said, Deborah and Karen really, really liked you at the meeting at Mattel. They were so impressed with all of your work. They think you're a great writer, and they also both think you're handsome. So I said, well, that's great. I'm glad you set them up with that. And she said, yeah, and you didn't even have to pretend to be intelligent. You know, this was what Andy told me when we were going to see Judy Price. And she looks at me and cocks her head and she said, yeah, I heard that story. So I said, okay, all right. I said, you've had your fun. What's going on? So she says, I've got a new show for you. She said, I want you to handle it. And it's Mattel. And it's a toy line. I think it was owned by American Greetings also, like the Popples was. And she said, Mattel's going to be handling all of the toys. So I said, that's great. I said, what's it called? It's called Lady Lovely Locks. And, you know, I wasn't familiar with the toy line, but she starts telling me about it. First of all, it takes place in medieval times, which I love period pieces. You know, I wrote this guy, The Young Dragons, my opus magnus or minus opus, I don't know which it is, 490 pages in the 1800s in China and San Francisco. So I love period pieces. So it's in medieval times. She's a princess in a castle, and she's defending her castle against the evil Lady Ravenwaves, her arch villain. And she's got these adorable rabbit-like magical creatures that are like her buddies that follow her around everywhere. And she's got these pixie tails that are like little baby dragons. How cute is that? And they, excuse me, they get in her hair and stuff, and they escort her on all of her missions. And of course, there's a brave prince that helps her out. But what I really loved was here was a series. And again, I want you to remember, this is the 80s. Didn't happen very often. The lead character, the hero, was a woman. And it was going to be many years until I had a daughter, until Kim and I had Zoe. But even back then, I realized there was a void in the television industry where you didn't have the lead heroes in some of the shows be women. You know, the girls grew up thinking you had to be a guy to have a cape and superpowers. And, you know, thank heavens nowadays we've got Wasp Woman and, you know, you've got the Powerpuff Gals and the DC young ladies that are superheroes. That's all great. But back then there wasn't that much of it. So I was like really, really excited to jam on that show. And Lori said, look, she said, I'm going to be in charge of the show. And I don't know what that meant because Lori's position, her title week to week would change. But she was going to be running the show. And she said, you're going to have a lot of latitude. If you want to assign scripts out, you can assign scripts out. If you want to, and story edit them. If you want to write them, Mattel's fine with you writing them. Well, you know, I had come off of a long hiatus of writing from Heathcliff and the Cadillac Cats. I wrote some of the episodes for Popples, but I'm ready to write. So this is all that I needed to hear. You know, I'm ready to jam. I don't know how many episodes I'm going to hand out, but you can certainly count them on one hand. So Lori gives me the series Bible, and I'm ready to jam on it. And I get into about 3 episodes, and we had a new guy that came on staff, Robbie London. And Robbie he's another one of these icons in the industry. Started out at Filmation, was integral part of He-Man. And Robbie comes over to DIC, and he was a friend of Andy's. And, you know, there were different camps at DIC. There was Camp Jean and there was Camp Andy. I was in Camp Jean. Jean brought me in. Michael Maliani was one of Andy's guys. And Robbie is Andy's guy. And he did a lot of writing and story editing. But Andy makes him the vice president of television for DIC. And he comes into my office one day and he's got a script and he puts it on my desk and he says, I got a problem with the first line here. I said, well, what's the problem with the first line? The first line was a shot description. It says, exterior, the ocean, long shot, daytime. Long shot in the entertainment industry means you're from way back. Okay, this is a long shot of me sitting in my chair. And Robbie says to me, and I remember the words, and he'll remember them too if he's watching this. He says, we don't do long shots at DIC, like he owns the company. We don't do long shots because we don't stay on a character for a long amount of time, which told me that he did not know what a long shot was. So I could tell we were going to clash swords. You know, Andy had made me senior story editor by now. I give me a promotion. And I could just tell that Robbie and I were going to clash swords. I'm not a fan of politics. I try to avoid it. But in the next episode, you're going to get a taste of how politics sometimes went at DIC. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll see you guys real soon. Take care.